I think I'm going to take your very good question, and I'm going to frame it in the context of the white space that I saw and that I wanted to address, which is I really saw it. MAP had the privilege of stewarding capital from endowments, foundations, and families to decarbonize in gas, wind, solar, and storage. When I looked at early stage climate tech, I recognized the fact that this space is emergent, the way wind was 20 years ago. And the way we got investors to invest in wind was that we diversified their exposure to it in a very curated manner. And I knew that most of the investors I knew were going to be respectfully and understandably intimidated by early stage. So could we productize that risk the way we had other things to build a bridge for them into the space and really not take venture risk, but get exposure to venture? So instead of trying to figure out which of these young, small funds to pick and get exposure to 20 companies, could we build a product where we put in 12 managers and they'd have exposure to 300 companies? So I did not aspire to be a venture capitalist myself and to put money directly into companies, but I recognized, Lori, the pattern recognition that just the way the best wind developers 20 years ago needed development capital to incubate projects, we could be a unique source of capital, like we were to the wind developers, to early stage venture VCs, and give the VCs capital that was money and expertise. Because one of my partners is a very experienced fiduciary. The other partner is a very seasoned strategist and operator. And if we were going to invest, we actually wanted to get in and help these early stage folks do what we think they do well, which is they're good at putting money in the companies. A fundamental block to early stage, whether it's incubating wind or incubating companies, is that the earliest stage, I make the metaphor because most of us have built a campfire. It's little sticks of capital. It's little bits of money, and it's a lot of time. And so many investors prefer to put in bigger logs on the fire later, once the fire's up and rolling, because there's a risk reward or a efficacy of their time and effort kind of thing. And so part of what we do is I've spent over 30 years going in with sticks of capital to other things. And so how do we bring other investors in? And if we can the 12 venture firms that we're backing, we think they're really good at picking companies and nurturing and cultivating those little early incubations, and then scaling them up and bringing them up to the next levels of funding. If we can bring them capital and they spend less time fundraising and trying to explain all that to investors who are afraid of this space, if we can be a significant LP and a useful LP to them, it allows them to focus on what they're best at. And I think this is a space, much the way wind was early on. The earlier you go, the bumpier it is. And so you actually really want to have investors that will ride through the bumpiness and the pivots and finding the product market fits. And sometimes the management teams of a portfolio company need to change. And do you have investors like we want to be who help those 12 venture capital firms we have in our fund that help them go through that bumpiness? So that's the problem we wanted to solve. And everything I've ever done is we want to invest with teams who we think are, remember I talked to you at ARCO, my job was to cultivate and figure out who all the experts were. So it's that expertise of when we think of the managers we've chosen, we think they're incredibly good at what they do. They have strong ecosystems around them to de-risk them, and we want to help build those for them. And we really, really want to help them be successful and build this bridge of trust into the space. And so I think you'll remember, so on the one side, we have these early stage venture firms who they're getting their platform set up. Some of our managers are on their third fund. Some of them are finishing their first funds. But they're really out there in this bumpy and exciting and important space, incubating really important companies. And on the other end, we have at least the investors I was used to. What do they want? They want attractive returns. They want a trusted GP who, can make their experience simple in a very complex space. They want institutional quality due diligence and reporting. They want people who can teach them about climate tech and how it works and give them access to managers. And then, of course, we're on a web webinar about impact, they want to make impact. And the impact we offer in this space is primarily greenhouse gas reduction across all the 300 portfolio companies that we expect to be in a fund like ours. So our role is to bridge, because if I can look at a legacy of 3 decades of fundraising and feel like none of those investors would feel comfortable going into early stage, our goal is to build a bridge that meets those investors' needs to get exposure to a space that they're reluctant to go in on their own. So that's why we're in this space. And maybe like investing in wind today is a very different world than it was 20 years ago. So the value of what we're providing today in 2023, investing in early stage climate tech and the whole space in general may be very different 10 to 20 years from now, because the whole flywheel of incubation will be much further along than it is in this moment in time, if that makes any sense.